The loudest man in the room is never the most powerful. Real power moves without noise. It enters a space without asking for permission and leaves people second-guessing themselves without a word spoken. Machiavelli understood this. Long before modern psychology caught up, he knew silence wasn't absence, it was control. The man who commands without speaking, who bends others without reacting, who owns the room through stillness alone, that is the man no one dares to challenge. This is the law of silent power, and it begins the moment you stop trying to be heard. Silence is not the absence of speech, it is the presence of control. Machiavelli understood that words are often the cheapest currency in any exchange. The man who needs to explain himself, defend himself, or prove himself has already lost the frame. But the one who holds his tongue, who answers an accusation with stillness, who allows others to speak while he watches quietly, he owns the room. Power does not announce itself. It is felt. And the man who says nothing often says the most. Most people talk to feel safe. They explain to be understood, to soften the air around them, to fill the silence that makes them feel exposed. But silence is only uncomfortable to the weak. The strong learn to master it, to use it as a mirror that reflects others back to themselves. Say nothing, and people begin to wonder what you're thinking. Pause too long, and their insecurities fill the gap. You haven't lifted a finger. But suddenly they're scrambling to adjust their tone, repeating their point, softening their attack. They are off balance. You are not. When you remain silent, people project onto you. They assume you know more. They imagine that your silence hides something dangerous. They overestimate your depth because they cannot measure it. The man who speaks constantly leaves no mystery, but the man who says little becomes a riddle others cannot solve. That riddle becomes a source of power because people obey what they don't fully understand. In every setting, social, professional, personal, the one who holds silence holds the frame. It signals composure. It signals certainty. And above all, it signals that you do not need validation to exist. That alone places you above most men. Because the moment you need to be heard, you lower your value. But when your silence demands attention, people lean in. They watch closely. They begin to doubt their own footing, and that doubt becomes your leverage. Machiavelli would not tell you to be silent because it is polite. He would tell you to be silent because it terrifies people, because it makes them wonder what you are capable of, because it makes them obey you before you've even spoken. The game begins not when you speak, but when you don't. The moment you begin to explain yourself, you place your power in someone else's hands. Over-explaining is not clarity, it is exposure. It shows that you are not certain of your position, not firm in your authority, not at peace with being misunderstood. Machiavelli understood that the need to justify is the mark of a man already on trial, and the man on trial is never in control. Weak men talk too much because they believe that if they speak long enough, they will be accepted. If they defend themselves hard enough, the judgment will disappear. But the opposite is true. The more you explain, the more you look guilty. Not because you are, but because you act like someone who has something to prove. The world does not follow the man who pleads. It follows the man who moves as if nothing needs to be said. Power hates desperation, and nothing reeks of desperation like a man trying to convince a room that he is not what they say he is. The wise man lets the room talk. He lets the crowd assume. He lets the weak throw stones at a wall that does not crack. That wall becomes terrifying. That silence becomes a weapon. People begin to wonder, why does he not respond? What does he know? What is he planning? And in that wondering, their certainty crumbles. Over-explaining also shifts the frame. When you answer a loaded question, when you clarify your intent, you accept their version of reality, you enter their game. And once you play on their terms, you have already lost. Machiavelli would never tell you to win the argument. He would tell you to refuse the premise, to stay silent, to let their words hang unanswered until they echo back on themselves. The longer you stay silent, the more exposed your enemy becomes. There is a reason the most dangerous people speak the least. They do not chase clarity. They do not rush to correct the record. They allow the world to think what it wants because they know something deeper. Control is not about being understood. Control is about being obeyed. And you do not obey the man who talks too much. You obey the one who speaks once and leaves the rest unsaid. Say less, say nothing, if you can. And when you finally do speak, speak like a judge, not like a defendant. Let the weight of your silence build pressure around your words so that when they land hard, not as explanation, but as finality. The moment you stop justifying, you stop asking for approval. And the moment you stop asking, you begin to command. Power is not always loud. In fact, the most dangerous kind rarely raises its voice. Machiavelli understood that true authority does not announce itself. It enters quietly and is felt before it is seen. A man who can command a room without moving, who holds the gaze of others without speaking, has already won something that cannot be faked: presence. And presence is the foundation of silent power. The man who sits still while others pace, who listens while others scramble to speak, becomes the center of gravity. People adjust their tone around him. They lower their voices. They watch his reactions. He doesn't need to interrupt, because the tension of his stillness interrupts for him. The more composed he is, the more exposed everyone else begins to feel. Because stillness in the face of noise reveals something the crowd didn't expect: control. Most men try to dominate with volume. They speak fast, interrupt often, gesture too much. It's a performance, and everyone watching can smell the anxiety behind it. Movement becomes a confession. I need your approval. But the man who remains still sends the opposite message. He does not move because he does not need to. He speaks slowly, or not at all, because time bends to his will. He owns the room by acting as if the room already belongs to him. Posture is language. A man who leans forward to argue looks like he's begging to be believed. A man who leans back, arms at rest, face unmoved, looks like he's waiting for the noise to end. And eventually, it does. People follow calm because calm is rare. Calm suggests confidence, detachment, power. In a room full of men trying to prove themselves, the one who doesn't try becomes the one everyone watches. This is not about playing passive. It's about playing untouchable. Stillness is not weakness, it is a form of pressure. It forces others to carry the emotional weight while you observe. It makes people feel they're being judged, even if you've said nothing at all. They shift in their seats. They double back on their points. They rush to clarify, to please, to impress. You remain still. And that stillness becomes dominance. Machiavelli would not have you raise your voice. He would have you raise your presence. Because in the end, power is not about how much you say. It's about how little you need to say to be obeyed. Silence is not a pause. It is a trap. Machiavelli knew that when you stay quiet, you do not lose control, you gain it. Because silence forces others to fill the space, and in doing so, they give away far more than they meant to. Words rush in to cover discomfort, to ease uncertainty, to protect ego, and the more they speak, the more they expose. You haven't moved. You haven't responded, yet they begin unraveling themselves right in front of you. Most people are terrified of silence. It feels like judgment, like tension, like something is wrong. So they speak, they ramble, they explain, they overcorrect. They share things they didn't plan to, just to make the silence go away. And you, by doing nothing, learn everything. You watch their posture shift, their tone soften, their story twist itself into contradictions. You watch them try to read you, then try to convince you, then try to defend themselves from a threat you haven't even delivered. That's the power of silent pressure. It makes them think they've done something wrong. It makes them project their own fears into the silence. They imagine what you might be thinking. They assume you're judging them. They start fighting shadows. And the more they talk, the more they lose composure. They slip. They reveal weaknesses. They try too hard to impress, to please, to control the narrative. But you've already won it because you never spoke. Silence is especially lethal when timed. After a bold claim, a lie, a provocation, say nothing. Let it hang. Let them squirm. In the absence of your response, they begin to doubt their own words. Maybe it wasn't convincing. Maybe they pushed too far. Maybe you saw something they didn't mean to show. Their confidence collapses under the weight of their imagination. This tactic works because silence does not feel neutral. It feels like pressure. It feels like you are watching, measuring, storing everything. And people hate the feeling of being studied more than the feeling of being challenged. A challenge can be met, a silence cannot. It stretches into them and forces their insecurity to do the talking. Machiavelli would tell you, say little, watch much. Let others reveal their cards before you even touch yours. Let them talk themselves into corners while you sit, unreadable, above it all. The smartest man in the room is often the quietest because he knows silence turns every conversation into a confession. Power lives in the pause, not in the noise before it, not in the words that follow, but in that single, deliberate space where everything hangs in the air and no one knows what comes next. Machiavelli understood that controlling the tempo of an interaction, when to speak, when to delay, when to leave silence hanging, is the purest form of dominance. Because when you control the rhythm, you control the frame. And when you control the frame, the outcome is already yours. The pause is not hesitation. Weak men hesitate. The pause is precision. It is the moment before the blade drops. It signals to everyone in the room that you are not reacting, you are deciding. A pause before you speak forces others to lean in, to wait, to hold their breath. Their minds begin racing. Are you offended? Are you amused? Are you about to agree or destroy them? The uncertainty eats at them, and you have not even opened your mouth. Most people rush to respond. They fear being interrupted, being misunderstood, being seen as slow or uncertain. So they fill every second with words. But rapid speech reveals insecurity. A man who cannot pause is a man who cannot control himself. And if he cannot control himself, he cannot control others. The one who pauses, who lets silence sit for just long enough to make the air uncomfortable, becomes the one the room bends around. A well-timed pause after a challenge disarms it. You do not defend. You do not attack. You wait. And in that wait, the challenger begins to fold. They repeat themselves. They soften their tone. They look for validation in the eyes of others. Because you didn't react, they start to doubt. That doubt is your victory. Pauses also create emphasis. When you speak after holding silence, your words strike harder. The room is tuned in. They expect something calculated, something final. And so even a short phrase, calm, quiet, unshaken, carries weight that shouting never could. That is what makes the pause more dangerous than argument. Argument invites battle. A pause signals confidence. The battle has already been decided. You're just choosing when to speak it into existence. Machiavelli would not tell you to speak quickly to prove your sharpness. He would tell you to pause longer than they expect, longer than they're comfortable with, because that pause forces them to confront their own position, their own weakness, their own need for your reaction. And when you finally deliver your words, they will listen not because you demanded attention, but because you trained them to. The man who controls the pause controls the pace, and the man who controls the pace controls the room. Reactions are currency. The more you spend, the less you're worth. Machiavelli knew that the man who cannot be provoked is the man who cannot be controlled. The moment someone draws a reaction out of you, anger, defensiveness, even visible discomfort, they win. Because they've pulled you into their frame, their tempo, their rules. But the man who offers no reaction, who listens with stillness and stares with indifference, forces the entire room to tilt around him. He becomes the fixed point, while others spin and stumble. When someone insults you, they expect a spark. They want the flash of irritation, the sharp reply, the change in posture that tells them they landed the hit. That reaction is their reward. It proves you care. It proves you were touched. But when you give them nothing, not a word, not a twitch, they begin to feel foolish. The silence rebounds. Their insult now echoes, unsupported, exposed, and they're left standing alone in its shadow. Non-reaction is not passivity. It's strategy. It's calculated resistance. It's the refusal to let anyone dictate your energy. The man who does not react sends a message louder than words. You are not important enough to move me. That message crushes egos. It makes people scramble to reclaim control, to provoke again, to press harder. And in pressing, they overextend. They reveal more. Try too much, speak too long, and you remain still. Stillness in the face of provocation is unsettling because it creates imbalance. The accuser becomes the only voice. The attacker becomes the only actor. The more they act, the more emotional they appear. The more emotional they appear, the less credible they seem. You do not need to destroy them. You only need to let them destroy themselves. And your silence hands them the tools to do it. Machiavelli understood that power is not only about action, but about the refusal to act, the refusal to be dragged into petty conflict, the refusal to be baited into showing emotion, the refusal to validate lesser men by meeting them at their level. When others rise in anger and you do not rise with them, it reveals who truly stands above. The man who reacts becomes predictable. The man who remains still becomes feared, because no one knows what he is thinking, or when he will move, or what he might do. That fear builds respect. That silence becomes dominance, not because it says anything, but because it makes everyone else speak for you. Let them speak. Let them shout. Let them push. You, stay still, because while they collapse into noise, you remain untouched and untouchable. Power does not always come from striking first. Often, it comes from standing still long enough for your enemy to fall on their own blade. Machiavelli knew that silence is not just control, it is a trap. The man who refuses to react forces his rival to keep talking, keep pushing, keep escalating. And the more they push, the more they reveal their desperation. Their anger grows, their mask slips. They lose control, trying to take yours. You did nothing. And that's exactly why they start to break. Your silence puts pressure on them. It forces them into motion. Most men cannot handle uncertainty. They need confirmation. They need validation. They need to see your face twitch, hear your tone shift, feel some sign that you are affected. But when they get nothing, no answer, no defense, no retaliation, they panic. And panic makes people overplay. They repeat themselves. They exaggerate. They say too much. They reach too far. And what began as a calculated jab becomes a public unraveling. The trick is to let them believe they're winning. Let them talk. Let them laugh. Let them insult, challenge, provoke, show nothing, react to nothing. Because every second you stay silent, their performance grows louder and weaker. The crowd begins to see it. What first looked like confidence now looks like a tantrum. What once seemed clever now feels pathetic. You've done nothing to damage them. They've done it all themselves. This is the game Machiavelli played better than anyone. Never stop your enemy when they are in the middle of destroying their own credibility. People think control means always acting. It doesn't. Control means knowing when not to move. Knowing that silence is not empty, it's active. It sharpens the spotlight. And under that light, your rival will show the world exactly who they are. Even in moments of attack, say less. When they accuse you, remain still. When they try to expose you, don't explain. They expect a response. They're counting on it. Without one, they're forced to push harder, louder, faster. And in that overreach, their intent becomes transparent. The crowd sees the bitterness. They see the insecurity. They see a man trying too hard to bring another man down. That's when the shift happens. They stop watching your silence. They start watching his collapse. Let your enemy overplay. Let him talk himself into weakness. Let him swing until he's exhausted and exposed. And when the moment is right, when he's said too much, lost his balance, burned his own credibility, you speak once, calmly, precisely, and everything he built crumbles, not because you destroyed it, but because he did. All you had to do was stand still and wait. Power does not always come from what you say. It comes from what others think you know. Machiavelli understood that silence, when worn correctly, is not emptiness. It is suggestion. The man who speaks less forces others to project more. They begin to imagine what he sees, what he suspects, what he might do. And because they don't know, they assume the worst. That assumption becomes fear, and that fear becomes obedience. Most men try to prove their intelligence by showing it. They explain everything. They flood the room with detail. They argue, elaborate, and clarify until they drain all the power from their own words. But the man who stays quiet, who offers only fragments, who answers questions with stillness or short, cryptic replies, he becomes something else. He becomes unreadable. And the unreadable man is always feared more than the loud one. Silence makes you a mirror. People begin to see their own insecurities reflected back at them. They wonder if you see through them. They question whether you already know what they're trying to hide. A look, a pause, an unspoken response. These small, quiet actions do more than an entire argument ever could, because they leave room for imagination. And imagination is a more powerful weapon than information. Mystery shifts the balance of power without effort. When people don't know where you stand, they approach with caution. They measure their words. They become careful. Not because you've threatened them, but because your silence suggests you could. Your unpredictability becomes its own form of control. They cannot prepare for what they cannot read. The aura of knowing more is not about being all-knowing. It's about acting like you know something they don't. A calm smile in the face of aggression, a delayed answer to a pointed question, a long pause before a short reply. All of these are signals that you are playing a deeper game, and even if you aren't, they will believe you are. That belief is all you need. Machiavelli would never tell you to prove your intellect. He would tell you to imply it, to let your silence build an image more powerful than truth. Because once people believe you see more than they do, they start obeying not because you commanded them to, but because they fear what else you might reveal. The goal is not to be understood. The goal is to be respected without ever explaining why. Say little, show less. Let their own mind create the myth, and once they believe you see through them, they will never risk standing against you. Presence can command, but absence, when used correctly, can dominate. Machiavelli knew that to be seen too often is to become ordinary. Power decays when it's always on display. But the man who vanishes at the right moment, who walks away just before he is needed most, creates a vacuum no one can ignore. That silence becomes louder than any speech. That absence becomes a force. Most men fear being forgotten. They believe that if they're not constantly present, posting, speaking, performing, they'll lose relevance. So they overstay. They talk too long. They explain too much. And in trying to stay remembered, they become forgettable. But the man who knows when to leave, when to go quiet, when to vanish, etches himself deeper into the minds of others than the one who never stops speaking. Strategic absence creates tension. People begin to ask questions. Why is he silent now? Where did he go? Is he watching? Is he planning? The imagination fills the void, and every imagined scenario is more powerful than anything you could have said. Your absence forces others to think of you more, not less. They adjust their behavior in case you return. They prepare their defenses. They try to anticipate your next move because they fear what they can't see. Leaving at the peak of your presence is a power move. Don't wait to be dismissed. Exit before they expect it. Leave a conversation with something unsaid. Leave a meeting before it drags. Withdraw from public view at your highest point of control. That sudden silence makes people hold their breath. They study your last words. They cling to your last gesture. Your influence multiplies precisely because you are no longer there to dilute it. Machiavelli understood that a ruler who appears too often invites scrutiny. One who withholds his presence keeps the mystery alive. The same applies to power in any domain. Visibility must be rare. Your silence must be intentional. You do not disappear because you are weak. You disappear to show that you are not desperate to be seen. That alone places you above the crowd. Silence in absence also tests loyalty. Those who still speak your name, who adjust their tone in your absence, who fear your return, these are the ones under your control. You didn't need to raise your voice. You didn't even need to be in the room. And yet, the room still revolves around you. Disappear not to hide, but to heighten your presence. Return only when it strengthens your hold. Let absence be a signal, not of retreat, but of power so certain it doesn't need to be constantly proven. Silence does more than conceal, it reflects. Machiavelli understood that the truly powerful man does not need to attack. He simply holds still and allows others to reveal themselves. This is the mirror effect. When you say nothing, when you show no emotion, when you refuse to interrupt or react, people begin to see themselves in your silence. And if they are unstable, insecure, or deceitful, they will confront their own reflection and recoil. They do not fear you. They fear what they become when they are near you. Most men are used to feedback. They rely on your reaction to shape their behavior, to soften their tone, to adjust their story, to know where they stand. But when you give them nothing, they are left alone with their own voice. And the human mind, when left without a response, turns inward. It begins to spiral. It begins to replay. Did I say too much? Did I go too far? Why isn't he responding? That uncertainty is powerful. It makes them question everything. And the more they question, the more they unravel. You become a mirror by refusing to feed their performance. If someone speaks with arrogance, let your silence reveal their insecurity. If they lie, let the quiet stretch long enough for the weight of their words to sink in. If they attack, meet it not with defense but with stillness. In that stillness, they begin to hear themselves more clearly, and it is often the sound of their own voice that breaks them. The mirror effect is not about humiliation. It's about exposure. It forces others to confront what they usually keep hidden. And because you said nothing, because you never accused them, they cannot accuse you of anything in return. You did not shame them. They shamed themselves. Machiavelli would say that this is the highest form of psychological warfare, letting people undo themselves in the reflection of your silence. You do not give them direction. You do not correct or argue. You let their own instability rise to the surface until it becomes unbearable. They either correct their behavior or they break, and either way, you win. This is why your presence must be controlled, your gaze steady, your words few. The more still you are, the more they reveal. And the more they reveal, the less you need to do. The mirror does not judge, it does not speak, it simply shows. But what it shows can destroy a man from the inside out. Let them fear what they see in your silence. Let your stillness reflect their cracks. Because in the end, the most effective way to control someone is to let them see themselves and wish they hadn't. Loyalty is rarely earned through noise. It is earned through presence, quiet, composed, and unwavering. Machiavelli understood that the man who never defends himself gains more protection than the one who constantly explains. Because silence, when held with power, does not create distance, it creates allegiance. People feel drawn to those who seem above the fray. They sense control in the stillness. And when that stillness is attacked, they rush to defend what refuses to defend itself. There is something magnetic about a man who does not flinch when spoken against. While others argue, justify, and plead, he remains calm. He lets the words pass through him like smoke, and that very restraint makes others uncomfortable, not with him but with the ones attacking him. The silence becomes a question. Why is he not answering? Does he not need to? Has he already won? And the longer the silence stretches, the more it becomes a verdict, not against him, but against his accuser. That's when loyalty emerges, not from request, not from obligation, but from instinct. People step in, they interrupt, they redirect, they silence the attack on his behalf, not because he asked, but because something about his refusal to respond made them feel responsible for protecting him. In silence, he becomes more than a man. He becomes a symbol, and symbols are always defended. Most people believe that silence makes you appear weak, but in power, the opposite is true. Silence suggests strength, so deeply rooted that it does not need to prove itself. It suggests confidence in your own reputation. It suggests that you've already won the room, and that explaining yourself would only cheapen it. Carry poise. And when you carry yourself with that kind of composure, people do the explaining for you. They do the defending. They speak your name in rooms you've never entered and correct it when it's spoken wrong. Machiavelli would have told you this. A man who begs to be defended stands alone, but a man who endures in silence is never alone for long, because others recognize something unshakable in him, and they gather around it not out of pity, but out of respect, out of awe, out of fear. The truth is, people don't rally behind the loudest voice. They rally behind the voice that never needed to speak. They want to stand beside something stable, something immovable, something that will not break under pressure. And when you become that, when you become the presence that holds steady, no matter what loyalty, is no longer something you seek. It becomes something others give you without being asked. Indifference is a lie, but it is a useful one. Machiavelli understood that the appearance of not caring is often more powerful than caring itself. The man who looks detached, unimpressed, unaffected, he holds the upper hand, not because he feels nothing, but because he shows nothing. And in that void, people begin to chase him, not because he asked for attention, but because he refuses to need it. The illusion of indifference does not repel, it draws in. Human beings are wired to seek validation, to crave signs of recognition. When someone offers too much, they are quickly taken for granted. But when someone offers nothing, every glance becomes meaningful. Every silence becomes loaded. People begin to imagine value where none has been confirmed. They try harder. They speak softer. They overcorrect. Not to win your affection, but to pierce your mask of disinterest. This is why the man who seems like he could walk away at any moment is always the one others try to hold closest. He has created scarcity. He has made his attention feel earned, not given. That scarcity is mistaken for value. His indifference makes him look full of options, of knowledge, of power. And people want to be chosen by the man who doesn't need to choose anyone. Most men make the mistake of being too available. They explain too much, offer too quickly, and react too easily. They think that openness builds trust, but in truth, it builds expectation, and expectation kills mystique. The moment people know how you feel, they stop working to affect it. But the man who keeps his approval hidden forces others to earn it. They lean forward, they adjust their tone, they correct their behavior in the hope of being seen. The illusion of indifference is not about being cold, it's about control. You may care, you may feel everything, but the power lies in not revealing it. The one who appears unaffected cannot be manipulated. He cannot be guilted, pressured, or rushed. Others begin to shape themselves around his stillness. They fear disappointing him more than they fear conflict with others, because his silence cuts deeper than criticism. It makes them feel invisible. Machiavelli would tell you, to care is human, but to appear not to care is strategic. Let others wonder where they stand. Let them work to impress you. Let them try to crack the shell you've placed around your emotions. Because as long as they are chasing your attention, they are not controlling you. You are controlling them. Make your approval rare. Make your affection hard to read. And watch as they come closer, not because you called, but because you didn't. Most men speak to be heard. Machiavelli would call that weakness. Power does not announce itself. It arrives with weight, not noise. The man who speaks only when necessary, who holds his words like a blade rather than a shield, becomes the one everyone listens to. Not because he's louder, but because every time he speaks, the ground moves. His words don't fill silence. They tilt the frame. They change the room. The final law of silent power is simple. Speak only to shift. If your words do not alter perception, reposition control, or reframe the attack, they are noise. And noise is the language of the powerless. You don't speak to explain. You don't speak to soothe. You speak to command. and the fewer words you use, the harder they hit. A well-placed phrase can do more damage than a 10-minute speech, if that's how you see it. Interesting, noted. These are not replies, they are power moves. Each one turns attention back on the other person. Each one refuses the frame they tried to set and forces them to confront their own assumptions. These words don't answer, they redirect. They destabilize. They make others question their tone, their position, even their intelligence. Silence is the setup. Speech is the strike. You build tension by saying nothing, letting others expose themselves, overplay, talk too much. Then when the moment is perfect, you deliver one sentence that rewrites the room, not with volume, not with force, but with timing. The man who controls when he speaks controls what is heard, and what's heard last is often what's remembered. This is why the most feared men rarely raise their voice, because their restraint builds myth. People don't just listen when they speak, they wait for it, and that wait multiplies the value of their voice. The crowd begins to measure their own words in anticipation of yours, and that anticipation becomes control. Machiavelli would say that in a world addicted to attention, silence is power, but speech, when rare and sharp, is domination. When you speak, make it feel like a verdict, a shift, a clean, precise movement that repositions everyone without warning. Speak only when your silence has built enough weight for your words to land like law. Never speak out of need. Speak only when it changes something. And when it does, speak so deliberately that no one dares to respond. Like this video, subscribe to Dark Blue Psychology, turn on notifications, and then move straight into the next lesson. Watch the next video now, because in the world of power, the one who waits to speak last speaks with finality, and your evolution has only just begun.